Let me tell you a short story. Within the kingdom there was a boy who watched his father, the king, rule with indulgence. His father dismissed repeated warnings from the Herald, the king's messenger, about a neighbouring kingdom's growing malice. The Herald had served the throne for many years and urged the king to take heed of signs and strengthen the kingdom's foundations. The father, however, had turned a deaf ear to the Herald's wisdom, choosing pleasure over preparation. This continued right up to the day of the attack. The neighbouring forces came in suddenly and ferociously. The king was eventually able to fend off the attack, but not without suffering great losses. The kingdom was never the same again. The boy, now king, was determined to seek revenge on the attackers and had dedicated his reign to this mission. He steered all of his resources towards building powerful weapons in preparation for an eventual retaliation. The Herald remained. He never aged. His voice was quiet, yet it echoed through the halls like a bell in the mist. One day the Herald came to the king and warned him of the unrest he detected in the villages. You must redirect some of your resources to the people. They feel neglected. The king, however, fixated on his goal, replied, "No, I am doing this for the villagers. They will be grateful after we successfully get our revenge." The king believed the villagers shared his hatred of the neighbouring kingdom, never realizing their anger was truly aimed at him. The day of the attack drew near, but when the king tried to rally his people, they revolted and started to attack the castle. You're watching Archetypal Wisdom. Join me in exploring the symbolic truths and mysteries of humankind. Remember to like and subscribe. Now, back to the video. The king was furious and set off by himself in disguise to the neighbouring kingdom, desperate to seek revenge however he could. Upon his arrival, he saw a happy environment. The people were well taken care of, and there was a new king on the throne, the son of the former king. He had treated his people with great care and had chosen a very different approach to his father before him. The king was overcome with grief. He realized all the rage he felt was actually at his own father for ignoring the Herald and not protecting him and the kingdom. The king was devastated to see that he himself had done the same. He had neglected the kingdom and its people, leaving it in disarray. The people felt abandoned by him and he had lost their trust completely. When the king returned, grief-struck and silent, he found the Herald waiting, not with judgment, but with open hands. For the first time in his life, the king knelt to listen. The king immediately set about making amends to the villagers. He turned weapons into wells, steel into water. Over time, the king won back the trust of the kingdom, creating not only a joyful collective, but a strong one too. The kingdom was faced with future attempted attacks, but they were dealt with swiftly and efficiently, as a united and wise collective. From that day forth, the king listened to the Herald, not out of fear, but wisdom. He tended his home with care, remembering the neighbour who had broken the cycle before him. What is it we are supposed to do with our anger? What role does it play in the journey of individuation and psychological development? The emergence of anger, if investigated closely and carefully, is often the messenger of the forgotten self, just like the Herald is the messenger of the forgotten villagers. It bubbles up on behalf of the neglected aspects of the psyche. In fact, one of the essential functions of anger is protection. Integrated anger allows a person to set boundaries and stand up for themselves and their loved ones. But when anger is erupting with intensity and little control, it points to something deeper, some part of the personality that has been buried in the unconscious and left untended. So how does this happen? Well, often this will originate in one's formative years, in which their environment rejects or punishes a certain behavior or trait. The individual then becomes conditioned to hide or repress a part of their personality as it is deemed unacceptable within the environment. Let's say, for example, someone was punished for questioning the status quo of their family dynamic. Their natural curiosity and intelligence would notice flaws in the rules of the household and point them out innocently. The family structure quickly shuts this down, punishing the individual in these moments for intruding upon the power dynamics of the family, stifling this natural trait of theirs. The individual quickly learned that if they open up about their observations, their family would withdraw love from them and subject them to punishment and shame. Over time, the individual got so used to burying that trait of theirs that they forgot it was ever there. Instead, they focused on the traits that were rewarded and normalized. This is how the ego is formed, the conscious personality adapting to survive in its environment. And in this adaptation, certain traits get exiled. The problem is, these exiled aspects of the psyche don't disappear or die. They wait, they watch, and eventually, they roar, just like the villagers. Returning to our example, the individual, now an adult, continues to shut down their own natural curiosity and observations as a trained response. They find themselves in relationships in which they are completely incapable of advocating for themselves. Soon they start to feel an anger that they don't know what to do with. They start to see people being unfairly treated and injustice everywhere. They become enraged by it. They throw themselves into causes. And it feels cathartic. It feels righteous. They are finally fighting back, overcoming this terrible sense of abuse and silencing within the world. But the feeling never lasts. It fades, leaving behind a deeper hunger. They become obsessed with finding the next battle, the next offender. Eventually their friends and family notice that they seem to be spiraling, becoming aggressive, intolerant, and rageful. The tragedy is not that their cause is false, but that their motivation is unconscious. If the individual does not recognize the internal origin of the repression, if they do not see how they have internalized the wound and become their own jailer, then the anger gets externalized. The world becomes populated with enemies, mirrors of the inner tyrant. Anyone who triggers the original trauma, consciously or not, becomes a proxy for the very part of the self the person is trying to liberate. This is how righteous anger turns into projection and repetition. What began as a cry for inner justice becomes a war waged upon the outer world, just as the king fixates on his revenge to cope with the neglect of his father. This is an unconscious attempt at individuation. The individual is trying to overcome their internalized wounds surrounding the repression of themselves by attacking the oppressive structures and people they identify in the world. So, returning to our example, as the individual is eventually confronted with this, they feel a terrible grief, realizing that they have internalized the repression of the family system and perpetuated it. They have unconsciously kept the family pattern alive of shutting down their natural curiosity and intelligence, resulting in the rage of this ostracized part of their personality. They are faced with the painful truth that they have been unwittingly oppressing themselves and trying to overcome that internalized feeling by attacking anything in the external world which resembles their formative painful experience. Just like the king who tries to overcome the pain of his father's neglect by attacking the neighboring kingdom, only to realize that he is continuing to neglect himself and his home. This is of course not to say that there isn't legitimate suffering and oppression in the world, nor is it to say that people shouldn't align themselves with the purpose of helping others. However, it speaks to the complexity of intention. The individual who is resolved within themselves stands up to injustice more directly and cleanly. They do not muddy the water with their own unhealed pain. They address the abuse directly. They are firm, not furious. They are not passive, but in fact more effective in facing the dysfunction. An unresolved psyche doesn't just respond to the world, it projects onto it. So when someone acts disrespectfully, for example, a person who has not confronted their own internalized humiliation or powerlessness may feel far more than the situation warrants. Their reaction becomes disproportionate because the moment has activated something ancient, a forgotten wound demanding redress. This can lead to obsession, misplaced rage, or even crusades that, while outwardly moral, become vehicles for inner vengeance. The irony is cruel. In trying to purge the world of pain, they inadvertently spread it. So when you feel these eruptions of anger, become a little more curious about them. Ask yourself, what parts of my personality have I banished? Perhaps then you will hear the quiet voice of the Herald carrying the message of the forgotten self, saving you from the civil war within. You've been watching Archetypal Wisdom. Remember to like and subscribe. Stay wise.